Hello and welcome to the CEO Entrepreneur Magazine's video shows. I'm your host, Nick Vatia. Simple things that we forget to do can cost us dearly as a CEO or an entrepreneur or anyone responsible for P&L. The advice you will find in this next video is worth its weight in gold. Of course, only if you act upon it. When it comes to hiring sales teams, my next guest is truly an 80-20 individual. Please listen to this conversation and pay attention. Eric Albertson is eloquent and erudite. It's easy to tell that he has been practicing the art for a while now. Here is Eric Albertson. Now, as you know, any organization is fundamentally dependent upon its team. Success of the organization depends, by and large, upon the capability and the delivery of the team. So, hiring is, I think, one of the most important acts a CEO performs for its senior management team in particular. And if we look at a company as fundamentally dependent upon revenue and sales, then hiring of the sales leadership team is something that should be of paramount importance to any entrepreneur, any CEO in a small, mid-sized company, and even in a large organization that's matured, if they want to figure out ways to continue to grow. So what has been your experience in that?
Well, my experience has varied over the years. I've worked for Compaq, Intel, Toshiba, Pacific Bell, and others, and we've had various levels of enlightenment. And to protect the guilty, I won't name anyone in particular, but in probably 3/4 of the situations, hiring was not given the process that it probably should have been to maximize the revenue opportunity that was at hand. And when I say that it wasn't given its proper due, what I'm particularly talking about is hiring is like a lot of things. You don't lose it in the macro level, you usually lose it in the micro level. You don't interview correctly, you don't get enough candidates in, you're not doing behavioral interviews, the system's set up so that the hiring manager is overwhelmed and can't appropriately narrow down to the best few candidates, and then they hire too quickly, and then they ignore the folks after they're hired and just hope for the best, and then 18 months later they fire that person and start all over again. And when you've got a bad sales rep in a territory, or even worse, a bad sales manager, the cost is more than most people want to bring to conscious thought.
This idea that you just said, conscious thought, I think this is where everything boils down to. Hiring has been, it is, as we agree, is of paramount importance. Yet it is seen more as an impediment to the process of selling, to the process of running a business. It's one of those things that needs to be done, but it's not given the kind of importance that some of the organizations, successful organizations, give to it, recognizing that hiring is as much a direct driver of growth as perhaps selling or delivering. And that conscious thought to the process of hiring is something that needs the attention which it doesn't get. And that's what you're pointing out. So why is it that there is no conscious thought from your experience?
Well, for starters, the hiring managers have almost never been trained to hire, and to hire to a process or a method that's been proven to produce a highly predictable result. That's one of the good things I'll say about Intel, is they had an excellent process, and the compliance with that process was expected and fairly rigorous. So they have a very high percentage of good hires in my experience with Intel. But in general, folks just, they don't have a process, but B, they have so many other tasks, and they're held accountable to fully perform those other tasks while they're being chartered with doing the hiring. And then finally, I look at things like hiring or any technical activity that is to be accomplished as a function of the level of distinctions. So what I mean by that, you only get distinctions when you've had experience and you've made mistakes. So you can get the training, but then you've got to go off and you've got to make some mistakes and be allowed to make those mistakes, but be allowed to make them in the setting where it's A, not too damaging to the company, and B, you're you're able to learn about your mistakes so that you don't continue to make them. So the fix there that I've experienced that's worked very well is just a team of a veteran hiring manager along with a new hiring manager. The new hiring manager just makes a nominal decision, just like someone who's trading with paper money versus real money in the stock market. He makes a call about who he'd hire, but the veteran sales manager, who's actually going to have the last word on the hire, points out where the errors were in the process, and then they go ahead with the veteran sales manager's hire. Of course, unless they agree, and then it's not a big deal. So that way they can get through some iterations of learning, make mistakes, be corrected, and not cost the company a great deal.
So what you're saying is that organizations that want to succeed at this need to institute certain procedures for mentor-mentee relationships and institute procedures to recognize that hiring is a key job responsibility for certain members of the team or certain members of the leadership team, if nothing else, and make sure that they get the kind of mentorship. But also you said that they need to have instituted procedures for hiring, right? Two things.
Absolutely. Education and then the mentor relationship are the key to success. And I guess the overlay to that would be rigorous compliance with the process so that you don't get a little loose on one of the pieces. It's just like multiplication. If you get a zero involved, oftentimes the result of a multiplication exercise is then zero.
Now, when you learn flying, for example, there is a standard way to learn flying. Most people start with Cessna 152 or 172, and you go through the process, get your PPL or CPL, whatever it is that you're aiming for, and then you go for the specific training for the specific aircraft that you want to fly. So the assumption is, and this is a very great analogy that you gave essentially, that it's like flying. You learn the process and then you practice. You become the co-pilot, second pilot, whatever you call it, until you reach a level of proficiency and experience to be a captain. And so this is great. But learning to fly is a basic, there are certain basic elements that you need to master before you start specializing on which aircraft you will fly. And specialization doesn't take that long. The length is pretty much in learning to fly itself. So the assumption is there is one single unified system of learning to fly the FAA regulates. In this instance, are you suggesting that in hiring also there is a standardized way that we should be adopting, that there's not a whole lot of diversity there? There are some key basic principles and we should follow those, and that learning program will be transferable across situations?
I am very much suggesting that. A lot of people will call hiring an art, and I will allow that there is a degree of art and discernment that only comes with practice. But in general, if you stick with the rules, it's still possible to make a bad hire, but it happens very infrequently. For example, just the rigor of following up with all of the references and making sure that those references are good. Getting the W-2 of the previous earnings level, which is a beautiful acid test. And then talking to some of the past customers in the target accounts that are going to be hired to be covered or that are like the ones you're going to be hiring to cover. Of course, you're trying to do this broadly enough that you're not talking to their friends and only their friends. So I usually ask to see the entire account list and the entire set of references. But it's pretty hard to completely fake that. And then the art would come in, for example, in those two, in listening between the lines. And after a while, after a number of hires, people tend to have the same language when they don't fully believe what's being said.
No, I completely agree with you on this one, that there are certain very basic things, if you did those, you will avoid so many